Julian had always prided himself on his calm, predictable nights. That was until the clock struck 12, and the usual hum of his apartment was interrupted by a sound that could only be described as a gentle shimmering, like someone shaking a jar of starlight. He froze mid-sip of his lukewarm tea, which was already tepid enough to feel like a liquid apology, and stared at the doorway. A figure stood there, tall and slender, backlit by the silver glow of the moon. At first she seemed human, pale skin, delicate features, and eyes that reflected a strange, liquid intelligence. But the ears, oh, the ears! Long, elegant, and impossibly expressive, twitching slightly as if they were listening to some secret symphony Julian couldn't hear. Hi! Julian's voice cracked in a way that made him sound like a cartoon character mid-scream. The figure tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that would have been terrifying if it weren't paired with a slightly awkward smile. "Please clean me, human," she said, her voice melodic, oddly polite, and entirely serious. Julian's first instinct was to laugh. Then his brain caught up and he realized he shouldn't. Not because it wasn't funny, because it was, but because the woman in front of him might be a galactic-level predator who had just requested a human maid. Clean you?" he asked, cautiously backing toward the kitchen, just in case she was the kind of alien that liked tea kettles with teeth. "Yes," she said, stepping forward with the grace of a dancer and the confidence of someone who had clearly never had to deal with Earth's plumbing. "My contamination protocols are failing. Your home provides a temporary safe zone." She extended a hand, which Julian noticed had fingernails that glimmered faintly like polished moonstone. "I require assistance." Julian swallowed hard and nodded because apparently he had no choice. "Right, assistance. Sure, I think I can help, maybe." The alien, Lyra, as she finally introduced herself, produced a small device from what looked like a fold in her clothing. It expanded into a metallic, glowing contraption with wires that writhed like tiny snakes. "This is my cleaning apparatus," she explained, peering at him with a mixture of amusement and caution. "It must be calibrated precisely. Failure could result in temporary molecular destabilization." Julian blinked. "Temporary what now?" "Instability, minor explosions. Nothing serious," she added brightly, as if mentioning that your toast might burn counts as a casual risk. He took a deep breath and tried to steady his shaking hands, fumbling with the alien device. The first attempt resulted in a small puff of pink smoke that left him coughing and blinking. Lyra's ears twitched in what Julian assumed was some combination of irritation and curiosity. "Do be careful," she said, though her eyes glinted with humor, "or you will ruin the experience entirely." Over the next hour, Julian discovered that cleaning an alien wasn't like vacuuming or doing the dishes. There were liquids that changed color if they were touched incorrectly, sprays that smelled faintly of ozone and lavender, and a series of blinking lights that required synchronized clapping, humming, and occasionally, a perfectly executed pirouette. Every mistake Julian made caused a reaction ranging from harmless sparks to minor levitation of household objects. At one point, his cat, Mr. Tibbles, disappeared for 10 minutes only to reappear wearing what looked like a tiny, glowing halo. You have discovered the joy of temporal cat displacement," Lyra said, her ears flicking with amusement. "Many humans fear it, but it is quite entertaining." Julian, holding a small, sparking orb he had no idea how to deactivate, could only nod and mutter, "Yeah, very entertaining." Despite the chaos, there was a rhythm to their work together. Julian would fumble, Lyra would correct, and then they'd both erupt in laughter at the ridiculousness of it all. At one point, Julian tripped over a cable, sending a cloud of bioluminescent mist across the room. Lyra's ears quivered, and she let out a laugh that sounded like wind chimes in zero gravity. Julian couldn't help but laugh too, falling onto the couch in a heap. "You know," he said, wiping tears from his eyes, "I did not sign up for interstellar slapstick tonight." "Yet here you are," she replied, the corner of her mouth twitching in amusement, somehow managing to survive. Humans are resilient, even when completely inept. The night wore on, and Julian realized that Lyra wasn't frightening at all. She was curious, vulnerable, and oddly human in her quirks. She marveled at the way shadows moved across his ceiling fan, and laughed softly at the sound of his teapot whistling off-key. When she finally allowed herself to rest, her long ears draped over the arm of the couch, and Julian felt a strange sense of protection, as if he were guarding something precious that came from a world he couldn't even imagine. By the time the first hints of dawn crept through the blinds, the room smelled faintly of ozone and peppermint, and Julian was covered in a thin layer of glowing dust that would probably stain forever. Lyra sat quietly, observing him with an expression that was somewhere between curiosity and amusement. "You are competent human for a first attempt." Julian grinned, exhausted and exhilarated. "Competent, huh? I'll take it." And somewhere between laughter, sparks, and alien gadgets that refused to obey him, a bond began to form. One that had nothing to do with logic, species, or expectation, and everything to do with staying awake past midnight, facing chaos together, and discovering that sometimes the universe was far stranger and funnier than he could have ever imagined. The days after that first chaotic night passed in a curious blur for Julian. Lyra had chosen to remain in his apartment, claiming that the temporal calibration of her ship required an environment rich in mundane human distractions. He had tried to argue that his apartment wasn't exactly a bustling ecosystem, more of a cluttered shrine to procrastination and unpaid bills, but Lyra's ears twitched at him in a way that made it clear debate was futile. Instead, he surrendered to the rhythm of their unusual cohabitation, which involved a delicate balance of alien hygiene routines, human caffeine intake, and far too many accidental sparks that set off his smoke alarm on a near-daily basis. Lyra's curiosity about human life was insatiable. She insisted on observing everything from the precise angle at which Julian buttered his toast, inefficient, yet fascinating, to the way his cat, Mr. Tibbles, demanded attention at the exact moment she initiated molecular realignment protocols. She asked questions with an intensity that could make even the most patient human squirm. "Why do you consume fermented fruit juice before sleep?" she asked one evening, her long ears twitching so fast Julian swore they were performing some kind of silent Morse code. "It's called wine," Julian said, trying not to sound defensive. "It's relaxing. Humans do it." Lyra tilted her head, studying him with the look of someone trying to decode an interstellar encryption key. "Relaxing by altering neural chemistry, curious, inefficient yet effective." Julian laughed. "I'll take that as a compliment." Her humor was subtle, often coming through in the twitch of her ears or the faint shimmer in her eyes. One morning, she had insisted on helping him organize his kitchen cupboards, claiming it was a microcosmic simulation of societal order. Halfway through, she accidentally activated one of her gadgets, which projected a three-dimensional map of the solar system across the ceiling, complete with orbiting holographic planets that hummed faintly. Julian ducked to avoid being bonked by a tiny, glowing Mercury, while Lyra tried to suppress laughter, the sound like wind brushing through tall, crystalline reeds. Outside the apartment, the city continued unaware of the minor interstellar disruption in Julian's kitchen. Lyra had expressed interest in experiencing Earth's version of public transportation. Julian had hesitated, mostly because he couldn't imagine navigating the subway with a being who could theoretically misalign gravity fields with a twitch of her ears, but eventually agreed. The journey was a mixture of chaotic spectacle and subtle absurdity. Lyra marveled at turnstiles as if they were ancient alien relics, and she tried to pay with a holographic credit token from her ship, which confused the station clerk to the point of existential panic. Julian had to explain, amidst stifled laughter, that on Earth, the transaction required physical currency, not antimatter credits. Returning home, they collapsed onto the couch, both exhausted and laughing so hard that Julian had tears streaming down his face. Lyra's long ears had flopped over his shoulder, brushing against his cheek in a gesture that bizarrely felt intimate. She murmured something in her melodic language, and Julian, guessing from context, said, "Yeah, I think we're both going to need a nap." Their evenings became a strange, comforting routine. Julian would attempt to teach Lyra simple human games, chess, Uno, even charades, though her alien logic often turned them into surreal, hilarious competitions. She would teleport pawns mid-chess match, or summon holographic duplicates of herself to mislead him during charades. Julian, despite the unfairness of it all, laughed harder than he had in years. Through the humor, they were building trust. But Lyra's vulnerability was never far from the surface. One night she hesitated over a simple task, eyes downcast, ears drooping slightly, a rare crack in her confident exterior. "Do you ever feel alone?" she asked quietly. Julian froze, startled. He hadn't expected such an intimate question from someone who could quite literally traverse galaxies. "Yes," he admitted. "Even in a city full of people, I feel alone sometimes." Her eyes softened, shimmering faintly as if reflecting starlight. She reached out, brushing a finger against his hand, tentative, human in its delicacy. "Then perhaps this is why your company is comforting," she murmured. Julian's heart skipped a beat, and he laughed nervously, because of course, he had to turn vulnerability into awkward humor. "Comforting, huh? I think we might be creating an interspecies support group here." Lyra twitched her ears in what Julian interpreted as amusement. Possibly, or a comedy troupe. The next day brought more absurdity. Lyra had decided to investigate Earth's culinary habits, insisting that she needed to understand protein aggregation in human culture. Julian reluctantly took her to a diner, where she ordered an array of dishes and attempted to taste each one simultaneously, causing minor chaos with flying utensils and a spilled milkshake. The waitress stared, frozen, as Lyra's ears twitched furiously while she muttered calculations in her language, translating taste sensations into some alien equation Julian didn't understand. "It's complicated," Lyra said sheepishly. "Humans are remarkably messy." Julian wiped the counter, snickering. "You're telling me." Even mundane chores were transformed into comic adventures. Vacuuming the carpet with a portable anti-grav cleaner turned the living room into a zero-gravity obstacle course. Julian floated into the bookshelf, narrowly avoiding a crash landing on Mr. Tibbles, who looked unimpressed. Lyra clapped her hands in delight, eyes sparkling. Fascinating, chaos theory in practice. As the week drew to a close, Julian realized that despite the constant chaos, he had grown used to her presence in a way that felt profound. Lyra had begun to share fragments of her world, the music of liquid crystal forests, the way the twin suns of her home planet cast shadows that could bend, the odd customs of her people that were at once alien and deeply poetic. He listened, enthralled, as she described her travels, each tale punctuated with humor and the occasional twitch of her ears that made her look as if she were perpetually surprised by her own stories. One night, after yet another round of cleaning that had turned the apartment into a glowing, humming mess, Julian sat on the couch, exhausted but happy. Lyra perched beside him, ears drooping slightly in relaxation. "You are resilient," she said softly, "for a human." "And you're exhausting," Julian replied, grinning, "in a good way." Her laughter, melodic and unrestrained, filled the room, mingling with the soft hum of her gadgets and the purring of a very tolerant Mr. Tibbles. Julian realized with a quiet thrill that he was beginning to care for her in ways he hadn't anticipated. She was strange, chaotic, and utterly fascinating, but beneath it all was a vulnerability that mirrored his own, a loneliness only the other could understand. And in the midst of spilled milkshakes, anti-gravity vacuums, and interstellar hygiene protocols, they had discovered something neither had expected: companionship. Deep, messy, ridiculous companionship that bridged worlds, species, and the occasional minor explosion. The night settled over the city, and Julian, half asleep, half wondering if he would ever get used to it all, felt Lyra's long ears brush gently against his arm, a reminder that sometimes the universe was not only vast and strange, but also unexpectedly tender. The morning began like any other, with Julian tripping over a stray anti-gravity gadget Lyra had left on the floor and narrowly missing a collision with Mr. Tibbles, who regarded him with the kind of judgment reserved for mortals who fail to respect feline supremacy. Lyra, perched gracefully on the arm of the couch, ears twitching like delicate antennae, looked on with a mixture of amusement and impatience. "You are human and therefore predictably chaotic," she said, voice tinged with musical mockery. Julian grinned despite the bruised ego brushing dust off his shoulder. "And you're the reason my apartment now resembles a low-budget interstellar theme park." Lyra's eyes sparkled as she activated a small device that projected a translucent map of her ship onto the ceiling, blinking in soft, ethereal colors. "We have a problem," she said, ears twitching in agitation. "The quantum stabilizer required for my vessel is failing. Without it, I may experience temporary spatial incoherence." Julian blinked. "Spatial what now?" Lyra rolled her eyes, which was an odd gesture that somehow made her even more human in expression. "It means I could, temporarily, exist in multiple locations simultaneously, or worse, in none at all. Please come with me." By the time they reached the city outskirts, Julian realized that accompanying an alien on a mission for a quantum stabilizer was nothing like a normal morning walk. Lyra's long ears twitched constantly, scanning frequencies he couldn't hear, and every streetlight seemed to react to her presence, flickering in rhythm with her movements. They arrived at a black market laboratory tucked beneath a crumbling overpass, where rogue engineers sold devices and substances that defied the known laws of physics. Julian's stomach churned. He wasn't sure if it was fear, excitement, or the lingering effect of alien tea he'd had the night before. "Stay close, human," Lyra warned, her fingers brushing his as she manipulated the locks and sensors with grace. Any misstep could be uncomfortable. As Julian stumbled behind her, trying not to trip over glowing puddles of energy or accidentally activate a holographic flamethrower, he couldn't help laughing. "You know, most humans just go to the grocery store for adventure," he muttered. Lyra twitched her ears. "Most humans are uninspired." Inside the lab, chaos reigned. Engineers were bargaining over devices that hummed ominously, and a small robot attempted to sell Julian a probability-enhancing snack that promised to improve his luck but had a suspiciously vibrating texture. Lyra gestured and the robot froze mid-sentence, letting them pass with minimal collateral damage. She guided Julian to a device that hovered in the air, spinning with a subtle hum. "The quantum stabilizer. Handle carefully." Julian extended a trembling hand. Carefully, like gently petting a cat. Lyra's laughter tinkled like glass wind chimes in zero gravity. "Worse," she said. "Much worse." With a combination of trial, error, and a few misfires that sent small sparks raining onto the floor, Julian managed to secure the stabilizer. Lyra clapped her hands, ears vibrating in delight. Remarkable. Human ingenuity, tempered by luck. On the way back, Julian realized that he had changed. He moved with more confidence, reacting to Lyra's otherworldly quirks without panic. He had learned to trust, to improvise, and to find humor even when facing the absurd. The city no longer seemed mundane. It shimmered with hidden potential, just like the galaxies Lyra had shown him. Back in the apartment, Lyra activated her ship systems. The stabilizer hummed softly, realigning her vessel with the precision of a cosmic heartbeat. She turned to Julian, long ears brushing against her shoulders in a subtle display of affection. "You have helped me more than you know," she said, voice tender. "Your presence has made this place a sanctuary." Julian shrugged, pretending to be casual though his heart raced. Sanctuary, huh? Sounds fancy. I just did what anyone would do, sort of. Few humans would have navigated rogue engineers, floating gadgets, and temporal cat displacement with such grace, she said, a smile tugging at her lips. You are remarkable. He laughed, scratching the back of his neck. Well, when you put it like that, I guess I am. But mostly, I've just learned that chaos can be fun if you have someone to share it with. Lyra tilted her head, ears brushing his arm, and nodded. Yes, shared chaos is preferable to solitary order. The night stretched on as they packed the stabilizer into her ship. Julian noticed, for the first time, the subtle sadness in her expression, the knowledge that soon she would leave, and the apartment would return to its quiet, ordinary state. Are you going to be okay? He asked, careful not to sound too sentimental. I will, she replied, eyes shimmering with starlight. But your companionship has left an indelible mark. I will remember it across light years and centuries. That is rare for someone of my kind. Julian swallowed, feeling both pride and the looming sense of loss. And I'll remember you, even if you vanish into thin air or multiple air or wherever your quantum nonsense takes you. Lyra laughed, a sound that seemed to bend the room like liquid silver. Perhaps you will visit, perhaps I will return. The universe is vast but not infinite. There is room for coincidence. When the ship's engines activated, the room filled with soft hums and glowing lights. Lyra reached out, brushing his hand gently. Her ears twitched, resting lightly against the sides of her face in a gesture Julian had come to understand as a silent expression of trust and farewell. Do not fear solitude, Julian. You are capable of much more than you realize. And humor, it will always guide you. He grinned, tears threatening but held in check by absurdity. Humor, huh? Yeah, I think I've got that covered. And maybe I'll be okay without temporal cat displacement for a while. Lyra stepped into the ship, and with a gentle hum, the stabilizer engaged. The vessel shimmered, bending light, and then, in an instant that felt both fleeting and eternal, it was gone, leaving Julian alone in the apartment that now felt impossibly quiet. Mr. Tibbles yawned, unimpressed, and Julian laughed softly, realizing that the chaos, laughter, and improbable friendship had changed him. He was no longer just a man stuck in mundane routines. He was someone who had glimpsed other worlds, shared impossible moments, and grown in patience, humor, and courage. As he walked through his apartment, brushing his fingers over the faint residue of alien mist, Julian smiled. The universe was vast, strange, and unpredictable. And somewhere out there, Lyra's long ears twitched in the cosmic dark, remembering him just as vividly as he remembered her. He sat down, sipping his now-cold tea, and for the first time in years he felt truly alive, ready to face a world that was simultaneously ordinary and spectacular. He laughed quietly to himself, thinking of all the improbable disasters, misfired gadgets, and chaotic moments they had shared. The universe had given him a gift in the form of a midnight visitor who asked to be cleaned, and in return, he had received connection, adventure, and a story that would stay with him for the rest of his life. The apartment was quiet, but it no longer felt empty. Somewhere across the stars, a friend waited, and Julian realized that no matter the distance, some bonds were unbreakable, shaped by humor, trust, and the shared absurdity of being alive. And with that thought, he leaned back, smiled, and whispered into the quiet, "Good night, Lyra, until next time."